everyone, and welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'm your host, Matthew Coble, and today we're talking about core networking with WWT expert John Chiarini. John has worked in the telecommunications space for over 20 years and specializes in optical networking, core routing, and related technologies. And as such, he's worked closely with both telecommunications companies and the world's cloud providers. His background has afforded him a nice blend of that deep technical expertise, collaboration and mentorship with a variety of colleagues, and really connecting all of his work with the business outcomes that clients really want. He's coming to us today from Portland, Oregon, where he lives, but he's right here. Please welcome John Chiarini. John, good to see you.
Hey, Matt, good to see you.
Yeah, welcome. How's the trip into St. Louis?
Yeah, pretty good.
Good.
Yeah, thank you.
Please have a seat. We'll jump right in.
Let's do it.
All right. So, to start, kind of the level set, right? So what is optical networking? And now we're sort of shifting this idea of core networking and core routing. So just explain that to us.
Yeah, sometimes optical gets confused. You walk into a data center or a telecom room and you see fiber everywhere. And so some might say, oh, that's optical networking. Yeah, they're optical connections. It's not necessarily a network, it's just connecting devices locally. What an optical network does, it connects locations, two or more that are any distance apart, 5 kilometers or thousands of kilometers. Mm-hmm. And so when we say optical network, that's what we mean. We're connecting multiple buildings throughout a very wide distance.
Well, so then would it be the case that we kind of think of optical as going away as a separate and distinct thing, and it's really more just kind of the kind of routing we need to do, or do people still think about both?
So that's been a goal for a long time now, where optical could somewhat collapse into routing, and it's been tried before, but they are still two separate and distinct things, though they are becoming, they're coming together, they're merging. But technically speaking, there's going to be optical technology and there's going to be routing technology, but the worlds are definitely coming together.
Yeah, and so historically, was it that they were much more kind of distinct things, and now they're kind of blending in, and that's why that's happening?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in your traditional environment, you'll have an optical network, and then you'll have people who you need to use that optical network to connect their devices. So you have 5 buildings, and each has an optical node there.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the next layer up, routing. The routing engineers say, hey, we need this from this site and this from that site. Optical guys, give me that connection. Optical team, give me that connection. And that's what they do. And that's what they're responsible for, a reliable connection between those routers.
Yeah. Well, so tell us some about the business drivers that are kind of moving us towards, the blend of optical and routing, and what are some of the benefits that organizations out there would see to really bring that stuff together more?
Yeah, it comes down to economics. It comes down to operations, simplifying things. So think about it. If you could take 2 layers, combine them into one under one management system, and treat it as such, that saves, equipment costs, that saves operational costs, that, makes troubleshooting much more simplified. So there's definitely benefit for it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I know, you just mentioned management, and that's one of the challenges. How do you kind of manage these blended networks? So how are organizations tackling that?
Yeah. That's the $1 million question in converging optical and routing, and each vendor, each OEM are coming up with their solution, but it's still being developed. Mm-hmm. But large providers, they develop their own systems. They'll take OEMs management systems, and then they'll create their own automation around it, create their own dashboards, things like this. Large service providers, web scalers, they have the teams to do that. They have the funds to do that. Where the challenge is when we get into smaller markets, where the enterprise, mid-sized enterprise, even small service providers, they can't do things like that. They just don't have the staff. Mm-hmm. So everyone's kind of hankering for this off-the-shelf management product to cover optical and routing. And it's happening. They're coming together. And honestly, even within WWT, we developed some of those applications for some of our providers.
Yeah, and just building on that a little bit, is that more of a kind of an architecture problem? Is it more of a tools and technologies problem, like the management issue? Like, is it start with architecture and lead to kind of the right software and tools to manage? Or what can you speak to that?
That's a good question. What is the challenge? Why? There's a lot of moving pieces under the hood. And making that all come together to correlate so many things. Because when you talk about optical network and even a core routing network, I mean, what do I mean by core when I say core networking? I'm going to use a service provider as an example, but then we can apply it to anyone. But a service provider is, that core network connects their locations, but then it goes out to all their customers, all the internet connections, all the streaming video, things like this, right? So that's their business. So that network has to be reliable. And we say 5 nines, never go down. Mm-hmm. So if you want to manage a network with 5 nines reliability, you have to have a management system that's going to capture the alarms and present them properly and have troubleshooting, interworkings. There's a lot of challenges. On the surfaces, it seems simple, but there's some serious challenges.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious, like, people out there might be asking, what really drove the evolutions here? And, where did this come from? What's some of the history? And kind of how do we get to the place where this is all, converging the way that you're describing?
Yeah, that's the really interesting part. So I think I briefly mentioned, it was attempted, early 2000s. Mm-hmm. And what they did was, it was a large routing platform. Again, I keep referring to service provider because generally they innovate first in these spaces
and these are like the telecommunications
companies. Yeah. Okay. And they developed a card, an optical networking card that goes into the router, and it was 100 gigabits. But at the time, the devices were huge. When I say huge, they're like this.
Like
big.
Physically giant.
Physically giant, physically. Right. And you'll see why I'm mentioning that in a second.
Yeah.
And not only that, they used a lot of power and took up a lot of space. And at the time, real estate in a router was very expensive. It was, it was expensive. So putting this large card that consumed a lot of power really wasn't a routing technology. It didn't pan out. They said, hey, it's cheaper for us to keep optical separate for now. Let's not do this. So, like I said, early 2000s. And so things went as such. So a standard optical network, right, you have a chassis, 6, about that big, 6 cards in it. Yeah. And, a card about that big, and that's where you got your 100 gigabit connection from, right? So things are, start to shrink. And, smaller, less space, less power, right? Mm-hmm. But really where it really changed is when the web scalers came in. Service providers look for efficiency. Web scalers, are hyper-focused.
Squeezing every bit of efficiency out.
Every bit. And so they would say to us, hey, guys, we need it cheaper. We need it smaller. We need it to consume less power. And so development teams, I come from Cisco. I was at Cisco for 15 years. So it's development teams at Cisco said, okay, well, we can do this. And it would get down to this big. And then, well, we could do this. And so ultimately what they did is they developed pluggable optics. Mm-hmm. So we go from a card to a pluggable optic. And the pluggable optic was big, 2 inches by 3 inches. And that doesn't sound very big.
Yeah.
But it doesn't fit into
a lot smaller than that big card you're talking about.
It doesn't fit into a router yet.
Right.
So they developed a chassis and they put all these pluggable optics in a chassis. And so a little 2RU thing, you have 2 terabits of connectivity. So now we're getting small. And then it's like, okay, let's make it smaller. So they develop a pluggable optic that fits into the router itself. Mm-hmm. And so we went from this big card, lots of power, to a tiny little plug. And not only that, from 100 gig, now this plugs 400 gig and 800 gig. And then the last thing I'll mention is about the real estate in the router. That changed as well. So like I said, real estate routers used to be very expensive. They're not anymore. The processing power is tremendous. The processors to build these routers, the price has gone down exponentially. Mm-hmm. So the router itself, relatively speaking, is inexpensive. So now it makes total sense to put the plug into the router.
Yeah. Yeah. hence the kind of movement to that being more of a routing problem, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's cool. I like the history of that. All right, well, so if the web scalers kind of drove that innovation, what other industries are kind of leading the way, taking advantage of that or even pushing the envelope with it more? And I'm curious if there are any best practices that, we out there should keep in mind as we're moving forward with these technologies.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it trickles down, right? They develop it or it's developed for them, then there's always benefit for everyone. Everyone has access to this technology. And that's sometimes a misconception. And even myself personally, I've been saying service provider a lot and I've been saying web scale a lot. Mm-hmm. But the reality is enterprises use these healthcare systems, SLED and FED, they all use these type of networks. And so the benefit to them is similar. It's a much smaller footprint because now what took a big card is a plug and that can go in the router. And then it's not to say there isn't an optical network because that plug then has to connect to an optical network that connects to the site that's 80 kilometers away. Mm-hmm. So there still is an optical network in play, but it's shrinking the size of it and it's somewhat simplifying the operation of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I know, out in the marketplace that there are lots of business needs, that this addresses and, just continuing avalanches of data coming from all kinds of places. But I'm curious, what are the top needs that you see out in the marketplace or what are the top needs you're hearing from our clients that really are driving, this move towards core networking?
Yeah, why do it?
Yeah,
right. Why not just buy MPLS circuit from a provider? Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. There is cost savings. If a customer is willing to take that leap into building their own, there's tremendous OpEx savings. As rather than paying a lease on all these services provided by a provider, they absorb the cost. The return on investment could be a couple of years. Then they own this equipment outright. So there's definitely a cost in that. Just removing that OpEx, then say time to services. We need a new circuit from here to here. Well, their team can just go turn it up really quickly. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're putting in an order, and not to say service providers are slow in doing that. It's just it just gives you a little more nimble in your expansion or moves, adds, and changes, things like that.
Yeah, well, and in the competitive nature of the market, I guess that a little bit more nimble can make a big difference for a lot of clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, so I know, at Worldwide Technology, we do all kinds of different things with technologies with our clients, their solutions and services. This seems kind of a special case, right, with optical and core. So I'm curious, how does the work we do here kind of connect with the other work that we do in general with clients, and what are the challenges? They seem like they're very complex, challenging projects. So how do you kind of weave it into everything else and tell us about some of the life cycles?
Yeah, you're right. They can be complex because there's a lot going on. There's a physical environment. The fiber itself, right, it has to go to buildings, has to connect to other pieces of fiber. You may need to amplify this. You typically do have to amplify that light signal. Mm-hmm. And sometimes these little amplifiers are in the middle of nowhere between two major cities. So there's a lot of moving parts. And it is, to a non-service provider, is very specialized. Service providers, they live in that world, but the businesses that aren't service providers, in an enterprise, SLED, FED, right? They don't have teams to design and engineer this. So my team, we're a team of technical solution architects and product sales specialists. And what we do is first, we help account teams uncover this type of business in accounts that don't deal with it on a regular basis. And then we kind of come in as, if you will, a special forces sales team. Mm-hmm. And we work with the sales team from, ideation to outcome. Yep. And we design the network. We help with the business side of it. What's it going to cost? What to present to the customer? Those types of things. We work with the customer, getting requirements and coming back with designs and the whole process. So you have account teams who don't don't represent this or don't work with this technology on a regular basis, they can rely on us to come in and be committed to the sales process with them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so if you think about sort of client organizations out there, like what are some of the reasons that a given client would need to start thinking about, we need to consider this for our business, and which part of the organization is that? Is that, getting in terms of the sponsorship of it, the decision makers around it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. You can go from the technical side into the business side, or the business side into the technical side. And those conversations, I can't say it always starts at the business. I can't say it always starts at the technical. But oftentimes it's a combination. The customer's technical team and business team are like, hey, how can we provide some efficiency here? Hey, this is frustrating. We'd love to do this ourselves. And so it goes that way. It's like, it's not one spot where it happens, but typically it's to provide some sort of cost savings.
And it sounds too like this is not a typical thing that organizations are doing. So they probably do need some expertise from someone like you who understands the deep technology as well as being able to connect the business side and the technology side.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're here for. That's what we do.
Right.
Yeah. There's a need for it because that's another thing about a core network. Oftentimes, there's a saying, sometimes set it and forget it. Mm-hmm. And if you don't operate a business where things are constantly changing, you have new customers who want internet service, new customers who want video service, you're not doing many changes. It does its thing. It connects the data center to the office building, and then it kind of, and maybe typically nothing goes wrong. It's what we call 5 nines reliability, but they might have to touch it if they want to add some more capacity. Mm-hmm. So you're not talking about it every day.
Yeah.
And so though it's a benefit for a customer to build their own network, you oftentimes need a team like ours who specialize in it.
Right. Well, so I know, out in the marketplace, a lot of people come to us for our Advanced Technology Center, and we've got all kinds of labs with all kinds of technologies from our partners out there. I'm curious, what lab or labs, some proofs of concept do we have in the ATC in this area?
Yeah, so we have extensive capabilities in the ATC around this. So we have optical networks, and then we have routing networks on top of that, and then we have management systems on top of that. And so we could essentially do a proof of concept in almost any kind of combination a customer may want to see. And not only that, we have a multi-vendor environment. So we can show X vendor and Y vendor working together with Z vendor's management system. And not only do we have the equipment, we even mimic the distances between the sites. We could say we can make it 200 kilometers within the ATC. Yeah. Just to say, hey, it works.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that we can do those sorts of simulations in the Advanced Technology Center. So it's not just testing the hardware and the software and the tools. It's like simulating the client environments.
Real world environment.
Yeah, that's cool.
And speaking of which, because ATC is so expensive, we have every technology in there. Mm-hmm. I'm working with other teams. Our team is working with other teams to make it even more real world. We have this core network. Well, what traverses a core network? It could be anything. It could be video. It could be Wi-Fi, whatever it is. So we're starting to tie them into our core network, and then using management systems to go beyond the core network and show how we manage a complete solution. So it's really fascinating.
That's awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about, what is the partner, for us partners, the vendors, what's that landscape look like today? Is that, evolving quickly with new technologies, new products and platforms? Is it more stable? What's going on in that space for core networking?
Yeah, it's somewhat of a stable technology, but there's always innovation. Mm-hmm. On the optical side, it's making it faster. It's not going to get much smaller. You can't get much smaller than a pluggable optic, but it's making that pluggable optic faster. Or it's funny, we're actually going back to line cards a little bit, where it goes into a chassis, but they're small and very power efficient. So say we're at 400 gigabits today, and when I say that, I mean that's on a wavelength. So imagine a fiber between two locations. On that fiber, you could have 96 wavelengths. And on those 96 wavelengths, each can be 400 gigabit. So that's a tremendous amount of bandwidth.
Yeah.
But now we're going to 800 gig. But believe it or not, 800 gigs being passed over for 1.2 terabit. Wow. So it's just tremendous.
Yeah.
The amount of capacity.
Well, and I gotta tell you, like when you're saying a minute ago to make it faster, I'm thinking like, dude, it's already the speed of light. How are you going to make that faster?
Then there's that.
So do talk about that a little bit. Like, is it more that we're kind of putting more bandwidth into existing fiber? Are we, using different, an increasing number of wavelengths to send more data over the same? Like, talk some more about like what is possible technically that's really making it faster like that. That's amazing to me.
Yeah, it's in the modulation. It's how the device takes in the data into the optical domain and then literally modulates it like a radio signal. Mm-hmm. And what they could do, they use multi-axis modulation, so you can modulate all around the whole 360 degree. You have a waveform that is vertical, then you have one that's horizontal, but then you have one that's diagonal.
Yeah.
And they just keep adding it incrementally like that.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. I love that stuff. That's so cool.
Sorry.
Yeah, please go.
Yeah. And there's innovation in routing as well. I mean, it's not only optical. And so like I mentioned earlier, the processors have become tremendously fast, tremendous. There's latency is really not an issue anymore. Mm-hmm. But on the software side, what's been a really significant change is routing's ability to reroute fast. So the mainstay of an optical network was, hey, if this fiber's cut, someone gets it with a backhoe, okay, within 50 milliseconds or less, I'm gonna move you onto a different path. And that is relied upon. And routing could never do that, because if there was a cut, if there was no optical protection, the router has to think about it first and say, oh, okay, you can go this way. Yeah. And way more than 50 milliseconds to do so. But with segment routing, again, a new innovation, not new, it's been around for a few years now. It can now switch within that 50 millisecond time frame. And so that's, we mentioned earlier, there's this coming together of routing and optical. Mm-hmm. And that's a really key element in that happening, because we could start doing it in the router now rather than the optical. Mm-hmm. So developments on both sides that are making rather than optical networking and routing, it's a core network.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, so you're kind of getting there already about sort of some of the latest stuff, but I want to kind of have you look forward and to the future a little bit. And what are you excited to see in the next several years with core networking? What are some evolutions of the technology you think will happen that are going to make a difference that we should get excited about?
Yeah, it's like you said, we're this fast already. We can do this already. Yeah, what is it? What is it? And for me, it's seeing that management system come together, mm-hmm. seeing that a true one pane of glass that's accessible to any size customer, not just something a large service provider developed for themselves. And that's what I'm really interested in seeing. And we're doing a lot of that in ATC now with this, we call it the multi-layer, multi-vendor lab. Mm-hmm. And we are testing out different types of management systems and watching the vendors evolve and develop as it goes. So for me, that's what I'm really looking forward to, is that a true one pane of glass, routing, optical, core networking being managed that way.
Okay, one last question for you. Getting to know you ahead of today, you moved from the East Coast out to Portland, Oregon, and you snowboard a lot. Yeah. And you teach snowboarding. Right?
I do.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, are there lessons that you take from the teaching of snowboarding that have been useful in your work with clients and core networking and stuff like that? Because I imagine there might be. But
there absolutely is. And frankly, my work in core networking has helped my teaching in snowboarding. It kind of goes both ways. Yeah. Because for someone to understand something complex, you just need to break it down into small parts. Yeah. And so in snowboarding, that's what you do. You say, by just making this little change in your foot, it affects the snowboard this way. And it's interesting, being in Oregon, a lot of the folks I teach work at Intel, because Intel has a big presence in Oregon. Sure. And I get a lot of engineers. And I would get super technical with it, like, oh, this, this function does this and this, and it clicks with them. They're like, oh my gosh, yes. If you do this, it does that. And if you do that, it does this.
Yeah.
So similar to core networking, yeah, super complex. But what I do in my team, all of us, we break it down into manageable pieces and explain like the practicality, not just this big picture thing, but by doing this is the end result, and just simplifying it, if you will, a really complex thing.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, I like to think that, out there in the slopes in Oregon, there's core networking metaphors being used to teach snowboarding, and then snowboarding metaphors used to teach core networking.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, John Chiarini, thanks so much for joining us today. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, same. This has been fun. Thank you.
Yeah. Hey, and thank you for coming as well. Another great expert session. We've got plenty more on the calendar up ahead. Lots in the back catalog you can look at anytime. Head to wwt.com/events, and you can find all that and more. Those of you who joined us today, many of you will get a survey. We'd love to hear back from you. You're welcome to get in touch with me or John directly and let us know what you think. That's it for today. We'll see you next time.